turn that over to Lisa.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for kind of some housekeeping rules, we need, because this is still an open meeting, we wanna make sure we're respectful of the record so that we can pick you up on it. So we have a recorder here. We wanna make sure that we're not speaking over each other. So that way the record can have, if we need to do a detailed meeting minutes here, we have that on the record. Secondly, I'm told there's bathrooms out in the hallway. If you're not familiar with the facility here and you need to use the restroom, please, I think it's just around the corner. Like I mentioned, we are recording. We are on Zoom as well, so if there's anybody that was trying to get on Zoom or didn't know about Zoom, when we published the agenda, we weren't sure about the opportunities and logistics here, so we didn't post the Zoom link, but if anybody has somebody at home that wants to participate or watch, it's just our regular council meeting Zoom they get on. We are Zooming. They will only be able to see this screen. Unfortunately, they won't be able to see us because there's no camera. Any questions before we get started? Okay, and does everybody know who our council members are? I kind of tried to get them to strategically place themselves around the room. I'd like to go around and maybe do that first, introductions of council members, and then we'll do an introduction. So, where do we start?
I'm Val Thompson, I'm on the council.
Brian Poston. We'll go around you a little bit.
We're gonna go around in a minute. I have an icebreaker here. So I just want everybody to know who your council members are.
Dick Staples, I'm the mayor.
Ron Smith, council. Rick Alonso, council.
Okay, perfect. Another point of order I forgot to mention is that we do have to keep a record of who is in attendance today, so we have a sign-up sheet going around. Please get your name written on there so that we can document in accordance with the Meetings Act, everybody that is participating, okay? So, we're gonna go ahead and move into, this is kind of a brief agenda. I'm told it's supposed to work on both, so we're gonna go with that. We're gonna go through some introductions, which I mentioned kind of briefly here. We did through our council, but we'll go through the rest of the attendees here in a moment. We're going to kind of summarize, quote, the problem or the challenge, however you want to look at that. I'm going to get into a little bit of how our general fund services are funded. We're going to talk about some of the solutions that staff has come up with, given the guidance that we've had through our state. And you'll hear me say this probably repetitively throughout the meeting. We can do certain things and we can't do other things based on what the state provides for us or how we generate revenue. We'll cover some of that as we go through the meeting tonight. If you cannot hear me, I started to lose my voice today. Of all the days, please let me know, raise your hand and say I can't hear you. I will mention that when I think I'm screaming, other people say I'm quiet, so don't be afraid to tell me if I'm not loud enough, okay? And then we'll go through a summary where we'll open up the floor a little bit to the discussions. There are two ways that we can answer questions. If you have a burning question that you want to have answered, or at least get out into the group for a thought process, feel free to raise your hand and ask it. You can also wait till the end in the summary and ask those too. Sometimes it's easier to ask the question when it's fresh in your mind, but we might answer that question too as we move through the program here. So, any questions? We're going to do our best to get us out of here as quickly as possible. I understand your time is valuable. I appreciate everybody that took the time out of your day. This really is a community problem, and it would not do us any good to do this problem solving without involving the people that we serve. And you'll hear council also say this, maybe not so much tonight, but generally speaking, they view community as everybody in Boundary County. So we're gonna do a little icebreaker so we all get to know each other. Part of dealing with things around conflict or things that are challenging means that we have to have space to be vulnerable and talk about the issues that concern us. And by doing that, having an introduction to the person next to you or in the room is a valuable opportunity. So I'd like to go around the room and have you guys introduce yourselves. If you're a resident, business owner, county resident, or maybe you're from another area, just visiting interested. And what I find important when we go through this is that we take a moment to reflect on something special about our community that you hold intrinsically valuable to yourself. And so in thinking this through, I thought it would be really good to take a moment and tell the group, if you were telling a stranger what you love about our community, that you would be able to say that tonight to this group. And what I'm hoping that will do is it'll give us a framework and an outline for some of the things that everybody loves, and we'll start to see trends throughout that. Right, and so we start talking about some of these general services, and we start talking about The challenge is, we might refer back to those things that are said at this point, so please be truthful, be honest, be vulnerable if you have to, about what it is in this community that you love, that you wanna see remain, that you're willing to tell a perfectly, raw stranger that you don't know. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and go around the room. Council members, I know you introduced yourself, but I don't wanna make you not participate at this level, so please, if you feel like it, participate. Mr. Rich, do you mind starting?
Sure. I'm Rich Buck. I have a business in Bonners Ferry for 30-some years, and that's about it.
What's something you tell us during business?
Oh, so,
It's okay.
well, what I like most about and why I moved here is because of the environment here. Environment with the mountains and the people that were here that I met when I first moved here. When I first came here and to look at property even was the biggest reason to move here. It was just exactly from a small town that I came from, which was 600 people. Bonners Ferry was in my size, and it was the type of area I wanted to move in.
Thank you, Mr. Rich, appreciate that.
I'm Val Thompson, and I'm on the council, and I'm a teacher in Bonners Ferry. What I love the most about Bonners Ferry are the people that I grew up with and the memories that I've shared with my children, all the way through the experiences from my own childhood that I've shared with my mom and my grandparents and all of my family, and some of the things that we've shared just in our own community.
Brian Poston, City Council. Recently retired, been retired for a couple of years now. Worked with Boundary Tractor for 32 years. Before that, I drove logging trucks. Before that, I worked at another motorcycle dealership downtown back in the 70s. That was Larry's Sports Center. You may not remember that one, but it was down the old Texaco. Moved into that. And that's where there's a restaurant now. But yeah. So I've been around a while. Seen a lot of different things happen. And what I enjoy about this community is I love the mountains, and that's all. I've rode motorcycles, snowmobiles, hunting, fishing, done it all, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. That's why I'm sitting here today. So I don't want to live anywhere else. So there you go.
David Sims. I've lived in Bonners Ferry all my life, and what I appreciate most about the community are the people that are here. Wonderful people.
I'm Rob Dawkins, lived here my entire life, also a resident of Bonners Ferry, and I manage a business in Bonners Ferry. I guess it's a tight-knit community, and when we come together, one of these is my favorite part of Bonners.
David Clark, I'm a resident not in the city, but about 6 miles outside the city on Bench Road. I do have a couple tiny businesses. Something I would tell a stranger, well, it's easy to brag about this place because the people are wonderful, the environment is wonderful. However, the winters are sort of long and gloomy. But I've kind of taken a position, it's a little greedy on my part, but I think a stranger, I tell them it's terrible here, so they don't live here. And on that note, I actually even, you can blame it on me, I was hoping for like 3 bad winters in a row, so that would help out, maybe in that note. Anyway, levity aside, I just love it here, and I moved here because it reminded me of where I grew up when I was a kid that just got filled up with parking lots and housing developments and strip malls, and it just got covered over. And I was hoping that wouldn't happen here, but if it does, and it probably will in a certain way. We need good direction, so I've taken an interest in the city because it's important to me.
Hi, Jerry Higgs. I had a career split between the Marines and the Navy, for which most of it was either been overseas or at sea. I'm firmly convinced the earth is 2/3 water. Anyways, after retiring from the Navy, I bought a house in Haiti and lived there for a few years. And bought property up here and built a house. As far as the people, Idaho people are resilient. They'll throw an elbow when one's, or I'll put it that way. But at the very same time, the people here are very generous, and regardless of who you are, or whether they even like you or not, if you're on the side of the road and you need help, they will help you. And this goes to people that are disabled, shut-ins, elderly, or whatever. Whoever needs help, they don't have trouble getting here. That's the thing I think is the trademark of this county.
Thank you, Jerry. Ms. Faye?
I'm Faye, and I've lived here for a number of years. I try to keep involved in the community because we need to be. There are many things in this community that you like a lot and don't want to see them go away. And I realize that with the lessening of the money that is available, we're gonna lose some things that are very important to people here. So I'd like to do what I can to keep it small and small for sure, if we can, and see what we can do to keep it the way it is.
Oh, I'm just Hillary. I love here. I love the mountains and love people. It's great. Good. Short and sweet.
Olivia, we'll jump back there to you if you don't mind. We're just going through introducing yourself, letting the folks know if you're a business owner, resident, county resident, or question mark, if you come from another area, and then just something you would tell a stranger about Bonners Ferry or the community.
What, me?
No, sorry, behind you.
Oh, great. So,
Sorry.
Olivia, Drake County resident. What would I tell a stranger about the community? Just that we're tight-knit, pretty close, friendly, and my favorite is the outdoor recreation.
Mr. Scooter?
I'm Scooter Drake. I like the Four Seasons here.
If you could, and maybe the folks in the back, you could stand up so we can pick you up on the recorder here, because it'll be real hard to give you. You can just stand up right there.
I like the Four Seasons. I like working with the city. I am the street superintendent. That's about it.
Thank you, Scooter. Jake?
Good evening, my name is Jake Geringer. I serve as North Idaho Policy Advisor in the Executive Office of the Governor. And it's always a pleasure to come up to this unique place, great people, and beautiful environment.
You don't get out of saying, even if you're from the Coeur d'Alene area, tell them what you tell a stranger.
Everyone's always great when I come up here. Friendly people, can't beat the scenery.
And it just say area, you don't have to just say.
Yeah, don't mention Bonners Ferry.
Thank you, Jake.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
My name is Kevin Callis. I've had a business here with Edward Jones for 20 years. And in 2003, when I first started, Bonners Ferry was the friendliest town in Idaho. That was an actual designation that we got. And I can say from experience, I knocked on over 1,000+ doors. Hi, I'm Kevin, please give me your money. And I was very well received in this community. I had one door slammed in my face. The rest of the people were so welcoming, so generous, and helpful with starting my business. It's been a life-changing place for me. And it is awesome. I will be buried here. So, yeah, I love it.
Hi, Taylor Davis, North Idaho Regional Director for U.S. Congressman Russ Fulcher. One thing I love about this small town is that even though you're in a small town, it doesn't mean you can't have a job that fulfills your dreams. So I'm blessed to be able to have the position that I do and serve the people that I love in that capacity.
Thank you for
Real
closing.
I'm Loretta Hunsaker, and I've lived here for almost 50 years now. And after the first 10 years of culture shock, I was okay. And I worked for the state for 25 years, and this is home. So we'd just like to keep it. We have a small town, not as small as it used to be, which is absolutely wonderful, but if we're not careful, it can also be somewhat of a nemesis because the world's changing, and we need to consider how that affects.
Shelley, before you go, I'm gonna have, sorry, Loretta, I'm gonna have, Jimmy back here in a reason, sorry.
I'm Jimmy Dorhofer, the city mechanic, and I like everything about this place. That's it.
Easy. I'm Shelley Kramer. We have Sugar Plum Floral. We've been in business for 15 years. I grew up here, so did my dad, so we're vested into our community. So we want to keep our community.
Adrian Norris. I live out at Moye River, so I'm actually not in the city limits. But one thing I've experienced over this last year, a little bit of hiccups, but in general, I've noticed that this county, the leadership is willing to communicate with you if you would just reach out to them. And that has meant a lot to me.
I'm Allison Hensley, almost a lifetime resident. I've been here since 1969. Old friend sitting next to me. I've worked at multiple places. I now am self-employed, have my own business. I also work at the bookstore, and what I love about Bonners Ferry is that people are very friendly and supportive, and it's an extremely safe place to raise your children, and other moms are looking out for your kids, other parents watching out for your family. And just when somebody needs help in this community, people are there to help them.
Kevin Kazart, city employee. One of the best things about this area is it's a great place to raise your family.
I'm gonna repeat a couple of the themes I heard and tell me if I got them wrong or if I missed anything. So I heard resoundingly that the people were one of the big reasons why, if you were to tell a stranger about why you love living here, you would say it's the people, right? I think I got that one right. I heard culture. I heard safety. I heard mountains, environment. I heard recreational opportunities. Did I miss anything?
Multiple winners.
Yeah. I forgot, we need to let this guy go. I'm sorry.
All right.
Go ahead, Scooter.
The snowbirds are not that bad.
Coming from the street superintendent, I love it. Maybe, Dick, if you could go, and then we'll have our last person come in for her introduction.
Okay. I'm Dick Staples, I'm the mayor. Moved here in 1978, had my own business, surveying business since 1980. We moved here to raise our family, and I think it's the smartest thing we ever did.
Ron Smith, City Council. When I got out of the Air Force, I went back to Kentucky. I was married, went back to Kentucky. And after staying there for a few years, I decided it was time we moved around my wife's family, who was the Hiddles and the Bransons and half the county. So anyhow, we made the move. It was my idea we make the move. And we came out here and decided what we saw in the people and decided to stay, and been here ever since.
Rick Alonzo, council.
Moved here in 1976 to work at Bonners Ferry Glass, and worked there for years, went into law enforcement. I was in law enforcement over 30 years. Been retired from that for 10 years, been on the council for, this will be my 12th year. And same thing as everybody else, I love the people here, and the mountains, the streams, getting out in the outdoors. Just a great place to live and raise a family.
Emily, we're just going through introductions. We kind of want you to spend a little bit of time telling a stranger what you love about it. If you had to tell a stranger something you love about there, what would that be?
Oh, hi, Emily Bosong. I think what I love about the area is we've got a good balance of, like, small town, but also we have nature right here. Sometimes you just have a small town that's just a suburban of something bigger, like a bigger city, so I like that is there's not like a big Coeur d'Alene 5 minutes down the road from here, we're a little isolated in a good way. And then we have all these natural amenities.
Thank you. And we'll wait for Mr. Kirby to finish signing in, and then we'll put the spotlight on him.
Really?
It's all about community here. You can introduce yourself.
I'm Daryl Kirby, old timer, has been.
Former mayor, business owner, resident. One of the things that came up that I failed to mention was family, right? We talked about family, meaning our own family and maybe the family of people around us. So I think that's worth noting. As we think about those themes throughout the presentation, you might see me touch back to that. I unfortunately didn't bring my notepad, so I'm gonna have to go on memory, so if I miss anything, let me know. All right, I'm gonna maybe step over here so everybody can see. All right, so as we remember, I'm gonna go back to the agenda. For those who entered, we just went through introductions. We're gonna set up the problem. You know, we won't spend a lot of time on the problem simply because a lot of that's already public record. Many of you have already read about it, many of you already know about it. But we're gonna touch on a few things that maybe you didn't know, or might be less common knowledge. And then we'll jump right into kind of the backbone of how city services are funded and then solutions. And that's really the meat of our conversation tonight. I do wanna make a recommendation that if there's anybody in the group that wants to come up and sit, please do so. The intent of tonight's meeting was supposed to be quasi roundtable. Council President reminded me that this is a U, so we're gonna call it a U table. So that means you get to sit up here, whoever that is. Okay, the problem. So like I mentioned, a lot of this is public record. Emily's and 90 News have done a good job of setting a little bit of that information out to the public. But first I want to start about, before you can understand what the problem is, you first have to understand a little bit about what general fund services are. Some of the common knowledge is that, you know, it might be police and fire, but there's a lot of things that are covered under general fund services that I think are worth noting. So essentially, when we start talking about what are general fund services, there are those services that are partially, mostly, or solely paid for by tax dollars. So those tax dollars generated will cover a little bit of how we generate those taxes and how the state allocates those funds to us. But for the most part, if it's a service that's paid for with tax dollars, it's going to be a general fund service that that's going to be subject to this hit, so to speak, when we talk about that. Hold on a second. This thing doesn't work so great. So if you're joining by Zoom, you're not going to be able to see us, but you should be able to hear us and see the screen. Okay, so I'm going to jump in. So when we talk about the general fund services that the city of Bonners Ferry currently has, we have a 7-person city police department. We have a volunteer fire department. We have a 4-person street department. You heard from some of those tonight. A contracted planning and zoning department, a city pool, a city golf course, and then we have our typical administrative services that include, as required by statutory authority, clerk treasurer, city engineer, city attorney, mayor and council, which is the form of government that this community has adopted, and the city administrator, well, not a requirement under Idaho code, is a form of government that our council has adopted, and that is where I fit in. Which I didn't explain who I was. Many of you. Who said that?
I did that.
Oh. I am Lisa Aylward. I'm the city administrator. I've been the city administrator, it'll be 5 years in April. I was brought into my position under the former mayor, David Sims, who's here tonight. Somehow he thought I could do this job. He had a lot of faith in me, and hopefully I'll serve you guys well tonight. We, like I mentioned, have a council mayor form of government, so the way we're set up is our mayor is the first administrator, so I work directly underneath him. I do his business basically, and I work with council on their fiduciary responsibilities as well as lawmaking abilities. Any questions on this slide before we move on? I'll probably ask that throughout, just so if there's a burning question, feel free to raise your hand if you feel like writing it down. You can answer it at the end. It's saying no. It's not a true meeting without technical difficulties. Just be careful. I think I have to keep this open so I can keep coming to it.
Might come after you, Dave, if we're giving her this job.
Yeah, right after I say this. See? Persevere and overcome. All right, the problem. So we can't talk about our general fund services without talking about how our other areas of city business are ran, and those are our enterprise funds. So what are enterprise funds? They're city services which are funded by rates and fees. They do not typically require tax dollars to operate. So what does that mean? In the city we have electricity, water, sewer, and garbage. We consider garbage a enterprise fund, but it kind of is a quasi-enterprise fund, quasi-fund, but for the sake of discussion tonight, we're lumping it in here. So here sets up the problem now that you understand how the city is funded. And anybody that wants a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, there's copies over here on the table. There's three different forms here. One's a copy of Idaho code sections, which we're gonna talk a little bit about tonight if you want to take it with you. One is the city budget, and the other one is the PowerPoint presentation. So if you wanna follow along or jot things down, you're welcome to do that. So the city has transferred each fiscal year 5% gross sales of its enterprise accounts, not including garbage, to the general fund. This has been done since as far back as the 50s, essentially when the enterprise funds were created. 2017 Supreme Court decision on general fund transfers caused our city's legal counsel, so the city's attorney, to advise the city council that this type of transfer could no longer occur. So what does that mean? This advice was given unfortunately shortly after we had just adopted our 2023 budget. So you heard some of the challenges that we have this fiscal year, and then of course into the future. Tonight we're not going to talk about this fiscal year, we're going to talk about the future. We have to get some traction on what the community desires as we move forward towards solutions to bring forward to the community, if it requires a vote, or if it requires other options, which we'll cover later. So in short, the following transfers were anticipated for this fiscal year but will not occur, nor will they occur in any future year at this point. Go ahead, Mr.
The electric fund contributions, was that, the whole distribution area of Bonners Ferry Electric or just city?
Whole all of this is all distribution. So we do serve outside city limits in our electric and our water and sewer.
Okay.
Not as much in our water and sewer, but mostly in our electric. And then all of our money goes into state pools and other accounts that receives interest, and that interest is also coming back to the general fund. So how are general fund services funded? I think it's a fair question, right? We're kind of here, we understand a little bit about the difference between taxable services and non-taxable services and how we're to obligate funds and use funds, but how are we funding our general fund services? This is a quick kind of, and we'll probably come back to this repeatedly throughout the meeting. You'll see me go forward and backwards. But when we talk about our actuals in 21 and 22, now, these actuals have not been certified or verified through our audit, but we anticipate they'll be closely linked to these numbers. When we look at property tax that we've taken in, the sales tax, liquor tax, and fuel tax are tax sharing that we do with the state. And short of being a mathematician and learning the algorithms of how they use that, it's essentially based on population. And David, I think, maybe has some better answers for how they come up with those numbers. And maybe our mayors, former mayors, we have 3 of them here. Wow, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now. Basically, a population is a big reason, or the big determinant of how we get those allocation amounts. Liquor tax and fuel tax, same way. Interestingly enough, fuel tax, that's the tax you pay on when you fuel up at the gas station. It is supposed to be allocated, and it is in our city, towards transportation funds. So that's an obligation that we have to spend it in the transportation part. You'll see some trends. Generally, those trends are mostly upward. One thing you'll see in our budget, we are fiscally conservative, meaning we anticipate, we don't look at our trends and say, we're gonna trend upward from what we did last year. What we try to say is, what do we anticipate truly getting? And if we do better, great. But if we do worse, our balanced budget community, or all of Idaho is. And so this allows us to balance budget being fiscally conservative. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that? One thing that was pointed out, it was pointed out to me about the liquor tax in 2021, how much we got versus last year, and that was COVID. So just anecdotally, we saw a trend in upwardness there.
Sure, it's all hand sanitizer.
No, it really wasn't. Was not hand sanitizer, unless you were drinking it. Okay. Before I move on, we'll come back again to this slide. And by the way, I hope you don't mind if the humor is a point of my kind of, modus operandi. I like to use it, so hopefully you're okay with that. Okay, so other revenue includes, we talked about taxes. Those are all our taxes that we bring in. We also have, I see, franchise fees. I don't know why this got set up that way, but anyways, franchise fees, property leases, fees for service. So within our tax generated accounts, we can charge fees for certain services. And you've seen that if you've come in and got a building permit, or maybe an electrical, oh, that's different, sorry. Maybe paid to use the pool, maybe paid to golf. Those are all things that are fee generated. And for the most part, when we have a fee service, we try to have that fee mostly compensate the cost of that department. Not always, though, you can't always do that. For example, planning and zoning is a big one where so much of what we do is educate, and part of that education costs money, and we don't have a fee associated with it. But on the flip hand, building and golf are very much driven by who uses it, pays for it, and it pays for itself. Some other revenue sources, grants for specific projects. So transportation, you'll see us consistently go out for grant dollars around transportation, parks, planning. This last year, we actually did quite well in our planning department in receiving some grants to help us with some long-range planning, and then also safety grants. And those safety grants are gonna be tied to like our police department, fire department, things that we can go after to help cover capital expenses. So purchasing a new vehicle, or buying new safety wear for our firefighters. We also can sell property or junk. You've seen some of those come through on our bids. Property, obviously we have fee simple property, we also have personal property. And then we have business licenses, traffic, so this includes business license, traffic fines, etc. And then federal revenue, and this, I just threw this in our ARPA as a good example of that. We see that it's not a source of income that we can predict or plan on, it's a source of income that does come in occasionally. Okay, before I go, did I miss anything? Looking at my leadership here, leadership, did I miss anything? Okay.
Just in a couple of other costs, that I was looking at, as far as looking at IT and, economic development.
Yep, we'll get to that.
But
So,
there's some, yeah, there were a few bits that I didn't see.
so when we talk, this is like with everybody's budget, right? There's a few sources of revenue, but there's a lot of expenses. So when we get to the expense side of things, and what I brought to you guys is the actual budget. It was printed as of December 31st of this previous year. You can take a look at that. There's been obviously some more expenses since then, but we couldn't get a report generated in time. In order to make today work in these screens, I consolidated a lot of those expenses into groups. So when we get to expenses, you see actuals, then you see 2022 and 2023, and you see that note minus one-time funds. What I attempted to do is give you guys tonight an opportunity to see how funds are growing without our one-time grant dollars. Because it gets a little skewed when you start putting grant dollars in there, and you start seeing big climbs, and you go, well, why are you climbing $200,000 in this account? Well, it's because we had allocated our dollars. And so it's not a fair look at how we're growing in our departments if we keep those in. If you would like to know what those amounts are, I can certainly give that to you. I took it out just to keep the table here legible. So when we talk about police, fire, streets, I lumped parks, pool, and golf together. That's kind of our quote recreation. And then other, which includes administration, admin, IT, all of those go in there. And one of the things you'll see is of interest would be, when we start talking about some of our growth within this last fiscal year, we were able to keep our costs down because of the ARPA dollars that came in, or the one-time fees that had come in. So we were able to keep our growth relatively stagnant or going the other way. But as we move into this year, when we start seeing 10% inflation, we're having to see big jumps because of some of those allocation amounts. In particular, the largest cost in our planning, or excuse me, our admin, is going to be health insurance. We saw a 12% rate increase in health insurance. So I think the most important thing to see is that we are still trending upward, but when we get those monies, how we are investing them to hold down our costs as best we can. Any questions before we move on? Leadership, former leadership, members? Okay, we'll come back to. So a couple key takeaways. The property tax revenue that the city receives does not even cover the cost to run a police department. Sales tax, liquor tax, fuel tax revenues range between 35 and 40% of our overall operating expenses. The city has literally no control over the state allocation rations. So, I mean, we can lobby our legislative folks at the Capitol. We can bug our representatives. Of course, we could always bug our federal representatives. That's even more fun. But really, we have very little control over how the mathematics work and how we get our allocation amount. The city cannot, this is a key takeaway, the city cannot make up the difference in charging fees. For example, I cannot charge you a fee in the planning and zoning that covers our police department or subsidizes our police department. That's illegal under the state of Idaho. The state of Idaho says you're only allowed to charge a fee representative of the service received. So when we set our fees, that means I have to justify the fee. I have to tell you why it costs that much to produce that service. So we go through a rigorous review of our fees and our costs and our past costs, and we project out to make sure that we're covering our costs going forward. And then, as you can probably imagine, throughout the year we're seeing how our cost revenues are coming, or cost expenses are coming in versus our cost revenue. And that generally tells us whether or not we need to increase our fees. If we're running in the black, we're usually pretty good. If we're running in the red, we're gonna relook at our fees and determine whether or not our costs are being covered, if we need to raise them. Any questions? Did I hear see a hand? No. So grants, we hear this all the time, and we heard it last year, was why can't we just go get grants to do this? Well, grants are great, and your staff takes advantage of all the grants that we are eligible for. And we are generally pretty successful. I think under the former mayor Sims, he pushed us to take advantage of state and federal funding, and you saw us do that. We received FLAP grants, we received a Blue Cross Foundation grant, $250,000. We received our first ever LTAC LRIP grant for Garden Lane. So you're seeing us take advantage of this. Here's the restriction. Grants, while helpful, are usually very specific about the project, and they are not available to cover our operating expenses. So generally speaking, a grant is what we go after when we have a new project, a capital purchase, one-time project. We can't really go after it to say, I need to cover labor costs. All right, any questions? Have we established, let's go back really quick so the folks on Zoom can see the agenda. We've gone through introductions, the problem, how our general funds serviced. Now we're gonna get into solutions. So you have any questions before we jump into, and you know what? I just realized that anybody on Zoom is probably on Zoom. So let's turn it up. Okay. Hopefully it's not a really loud ding. All right, so those of you on Zoom, if you have questions, we can't see you, but we can hear you. If you turn off your mute, just make sure you give us a notice that you want to speak. So before we go on, any questions? I'm doing a lot of talking. I'm ready to hand over here pretty soon for you guys. All right. Sorry, I just wanted to give the folks on Zoom a chance to see the agenda. All right. So again, I want to reiterate, the solutions that are going to be presented tonight are those that have standing within the court system, within the legislative system under the Idaho State Code, and are the solutions that we feel are the most transparent and the most available to us to solve. I've heard and I've met with some of you individually, and we've talked about maybe some more creative solutions about how to charge certain accounts and all that, and I'm not saying that's off the table, it's just that at this point going forward, we're very interested in trying to be more transparent and more simple in the way we attack these problems. So, first option, and you've heard us talk about this, is cutting services. When we think about the $450,000 general fund transfer that has been occurring since, or I should go back and say the 5% gross sales transferring into general fund, that has essentially kept the services and property tax affordable. So the primary beneficiary of that transfer hasn't been the city, it hasn't been the staff, it's been the property taxpayer. You could argue that, I guess, but that's my opinion. The property taxpayer has received the benefit of a lower tax base, meaning that dollar for dollar, the dollar you spend on your property tax results in $2 worth of services, essentially. And that's not perfect math, but it's simple math. So in order to make up the $450,000 shortfall, we could take the services that we currently provide and bring them more down into line with the taxpayer, the property tax that we're taking, and the sales tax and revenue, state revenue sharing that we're getting, and fit it more into that. So it's kind of like living within your means, right? Good way of saying it. So what does that mean? What are those services? And many of you have talked to me about, well, gosh, do we really need a city pool? I mean, that really seems like a luxury. What's another one? Do we really need city parks? And I put some amounts of money on here that give you kind of a sense for the amount of money we'd be saving if we cut that service. Do we really need planning and zoning? I mean, come on, it's just another governmental red tape, right? I mean, bureaucracy, right? I argue, being a planner, former planner, that, and I worked private sector for 10 years, so I understand the value of this service, that there are so many people out there that, require that immediate knowledge of planning and zoning services so that they can either sell property and look at business opportunities. So, that one has real consequences to our business owners and our property owners. So this is another one that's been discussed is, well, geez, employee benefits. It sure is nice to work for the city when you can get these great benefits. I put unknown because we start messing with that, it gets real muddy, murky. We get into some murky waters, and the risk of losing employees is frightening when we're in a market like this where you can't find people to work. And then, of course, as we elevate up, we're talking about whole departments. You know, what are options here? We went back and we go back to the expenses, we start talking about police, fire, streets, etc. We start getting rid of whole departments. What does that mean? And I argue quality of life has a factor. So any one of these major service, if cut, would affect business economics, residents, and county residents' quality of life. I realize that's somewhat of a personal statement, but I think as we start to think about the implications, you'll see similar, and you'll feel similar impacts. Okay, so the other option. Well, if our property tax is not adequately supporting the services along with the state revenue we're receiving, then why not just increase property tax? And that's a viable option. So who would pay? Right now, we would see city residents pay. So if you have property inside city limits, one of the reasons I went around the room and asked you if you're a city resident is because obviously there would be an impact here to you. We'd also see city businesses impacted. So if you're a business owner, you're gonna pay more on your property tax. Seniors or those who are on fixed incomes, they will be affected. Renters, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch more. These are just a few in order to kind of fill up this box. So how much? All right, so say it's worth it. Maybe it's worth looking at this option. And that's kind of the question that we'll pose to you tonight in our summary is, what do we pay? Across the board, all property owners in the city limits would likely see about a 63% rate increase in the property tax. Now, I wanna be careful that you understand when you take this away. It's not property tax as a whole. And I went through this exercise with one of our council members earlier. When you look at what you paid, it's not 63% more there. It's 63% more on the line item that goes to the city. So when you look at your bill, you'll see some of it goes to the school district, some of it goes to the county, some of it goes to ambulance service, some of it goes to the city. That line item on the city would be affected by 63%. So let's do some quick math. And this is based on a real life scenario inside city limits. A house that's currently valued at $300,000, which unfortunately isn't too far off median values anymore. And that's net home value. So this is after your deductions are taken off, your homeowner's exemption, your, if you have a circuit breaker, if you have private property tax in there, etc. So this is net value. Currently would pay around $700 a year in that line item to the city of Bonners Ferry. 63% increase would equate to about a $441 increase in that line item. So we're talking new taxes would be about a $1,441. And that's really to pay for the services that are already there, that we currently enjoy. Interestingly enough, this particular option, if desired by the community, would require a supermajority vote, meaning 66% of those who vote, city, and unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, these would be city voters voting on this, since it affects the land within the city limits. 66% have to vote into approval. Any questions? Go ahead. Sorry, Mr. Rich, just a second.
Yeah, you've got, your $700 for your line item for the city, and a 63% increase is $441, but then you have your new taxes would be $1,441, and that's double what your $700 is. So,
Oh, sorry, 1141.
okay, thank you.
That's what happens when you get a plan.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I talked to Lisa today and to see what the increase is 63%. So I took my taxes for this past year, and my taxes to the city on my residence were $746. They have an increase by $470, so I'd have to pay $1,216, which is nuts.
Then we have to add the school bond if they pass this year.
Yeah, but that will
That has nothing
increase.
to do with this.
No, but it's in my pocket.
Oh, yeah, but it's definitely, this doesn't include other potential bonds or anything else being passed. This
Right.
is just specifically the city, so.
Right, but from a citizen's point of view, we have to think overall, how does it affect us, right?
Residents, so this one would only be city residents. So,
Right,
yeah.
but from a citizen's point of view, that's what they have to consider.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, what?
Go ahead, Mr. Rich. Sorry.
Yeah, a city resident, so that would be, just, if I own my business is in the city, but I live outside the city limits, so it would be just on my store, but.
Yes.
But
does the state, since we're on that subject, does the state, when you, like I say, I can't vote in the city, so I can't even vote on this, really, even though I own my business. Is that state, can that ever be, that's never been changed, or anybody ever, I mean, I know there's
I
complications
love this
with
question
that.
because I can punt. Sorry, no, I think, I'm sure our representatives hear this all the time. I unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on my circumstances today, I'm glad we don't have to argue this, because I definitely see pros and cons to either.
Yes,
But
I
yeah,
know.
at this point, the state law says only those who reside or have domicile within the city would be the ones that would vote. So property owners who pay property tax definitely are affected by this. This is why we reached out, and when we think about the cross-section in this room tonight, they represent various degrees of people's interests, right? We have county, city, business owners, past leadership, and it's not an easy answer, hence why we need the dialogue to happen. And there are some restrictions. Yes, go ahead.
So then, why,
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. All right.
would it be possible to lower our fees for water, sewer, power by 5%?
Yeah, so just,
That's no longer going to be.
yeah, that's a good question. So I'll reiterate so that folks online can hear and the record hears. The question was whether or not, the fees, or sorry, the transfer that's been happening, that 5% gross sale will go back into those utilities and keep fees lower, and the answer is yes. In fact, this last year, because we saw double digit in inflationary costs and across all sectors, almost, we were looking at a pretty egregious step up into meeting our obligations on our expenses, and we were able, with those general fund transfers going back in, to keep it only at 5%. So what we're doing essentially is trying to hold our prices as best we can in those areas. But as things grow so quickly, it's hard for us.
So we were gonna see this increase regardless, we were just gonna see it in.
You probably would have seen something closer to 9 or 10%.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so the other option, and I've heard people talk about it, and you've probably heard me talk about it, is local option. So to make up the shortfall, we could raise revenue through local option tax. Before we go on, I want to go back to this one. Those of you that grabbed a copy of the slides, if you could correct that on your slide. I apologize for that, I did there for the folks online, but if you have one, you can take it home with you. I want to make sure that's correct. Okay, so who would pay? So does everybody understand what local option is? It's an option to pass locally funds to be raised through taxes, paid for, depending on the circumstances. There's a lot of different circumstances, we'll get into that, on how we can tax local goods, not services, but goods. So who would pay? We have, first one, visitors and tourists. We have county residents, we have city residents, and I'm sure there's more too, but for the most part, we're kind of consolidating our payment, but we're actually broadening the spectrum of who's paying, right? So we're looking at everybody paying their portion, how much. So early estimates, and you have to remember, and David, who's with our EDC for the county, can maybe help talk a little bit about estimated numbers. We get numbers from the state tax commission that tells us how much revenue is generated countywide, and so we have to kind of populate that down or figure out what we think is the revenue share or the revenue amount in city limits.
And actually, it's really an estimate because the state, when businesses submit their sales tax numbers, the state allocates those or based on the address that's put on the form. So if you have an accountant in Bonner County that puts their address, Bonner County address, it'll show as sales in Bonner County. If you have an accountant out of state, it shows as out of state. So they used to publish on their website by county, and then they also had a multi-county line and an out of state line. They did give me some more updated figures, but this is the caveat that they sent with those new figures. This is based on the address listed on the sales tax return. It is not an accurate tally of the sales tax generated by location. The sales tax data is not reported by where the sales take place and can be distorted to a large extent by circumstances in each area. So it really is an estimate. The city of Ponderay instituted a local option tax 3 years ago, And I remember asking them at the time what they were gonna get, and they said, we don't know. And they literally didn't know until they had a full year's worth of sales tax. So it's the way the state keeps records. But, I think it will be in that $500,000 range.
Go ahead, Adrian.
Is this where the, idea of the resort tax is going to hopefully compensate for some of this?
So resort tax is what it's called under Idaho code.
Okay,
There is some standards within resort tax, but it's somewhat of a challenge in addressing when it comes to what resort is, even under state law.
right,
So
but will this help?
This would fall underneath that, and I have the code sections over here if you're
And
interested.
it would help alleviate some of the,
Yeah, so the
tax
resort
burden.
tax, or we call it local option, just to kind of keep it simple, would be raised locally within the city of Bonners Ferry and used towards Bonners Ferry, and
Okay.
stay local. That's why
Okay.
we call it local option. Go ahead.
Could this affect internet sales too?
I believe so. It's a good question. If it's done
I
inside
don't
city
believe
limits.
so, it's just businesses that are physically here.
That's a good, there's still a lot of questions around some of the nuances.
Was Andre ever able to tell you what their actual
Yes,
funds generate?
so Ponderay I guess the year that they just ended, it was approximately $3 million that they collected. Of course, they have Walmart, they have Home Depot, you know, they have North 40, so they have a lot of retail businesses there.
What's their tax gonna be, their local option tax that they decide?
Ponderay is 1%, but then they,
We'll go through, David, I
Yes,
got a
yeah,
slide on
okay,
that, so I appreciate the question, Loretta. I think, part of the dialogue that we'll go through at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what other cities are doing. Is there any other questions before we move on? Go ahead, Ms. Bowden.
There were a few caps that we talked about as far as.
Yeah, we're not kind of getting into, because tonight is about gaining direction from the community, hearing feedback, questions, et cetera. We're not necessarily scripted in where we're going tonight. We really want to make sure the community understands that we're not committed to a lane. We're trying to get feedback through this opportunity of feedback loop about what lane we want to get in before we start to develop the solutions. So what Val is alluding to is within the local option framework within Idaho code, we can restrict certain sales amounts. So you could say anything over $1,000 is exempt from the tax.
I mentioned at the beginning of the article.
Yes, and that's fine. I just wanted to make sure.
And so I just wanted to be clear about that there were different things that people might have been talking about that way. So.
And short of getting into those what if scenarios, we kind of wanted to know if that was the lane we were going to be in. Or if the lane was over here, there's no point in investing staff time and city time to go down a lane that's the community would reject.
Lisa.
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
I was looking at the back of your head.
I was trying to get.
I think it needs to be brought out that option number 3 could not be put into effect for this year anyhow.
Yeah, and I'm not there yet because my delete off thing doesn't work. Where's IT? Oh, yeah, that's it. Alright, we'll go here. So quick math. If the average family of 4, and I will admit I used myself in this. I have a $2 app on my phone that it's a checkbook calculator that keeps track of all my expenses, and I can categorize it into different areas. So if I spent $10,000, which isn't unreasonable to assume when you go to the grocery store and you're going out to eat, whatever, on taxable goods, that amount that somebody would pay in that year would be about $100 in that additional sales tax. So versus the taxpayer paying, as we mentioned, $440 on that $300,000 net value property. So when you look at that comparison of, well, if that city property owner was having to pay that local option tax and they were the only ones having to pay that, they would have to spend somewhere around $40,000 in order to make an equitable contribution to what local option could do, because we have a whole larger source paying into it. So, as mentioned previously, in the property tax increase, we'd be looking at, this would require a vote, and it's not a super majority, it's just a majority of 60%. Any questions? we're almost done. I told you we were gonna spend, this will be the time where we're spending a lot of time in this area, so we're getting close to that. So, as mentioned earlier, there are some statutory requirements of local option. The state law requires, and I'll go through those, but the sections of code, I've got copies over here, you're welcome to grab one, and get into some of the details, or if you have one, you can read along with me. The term must be set, so this is something that can't be forever. It's definitely a challenge, right? Because we want police, we want fire, we want streets, we don't want them to go away after local option goes away. So that's a challenge that we're gonna have to overcome. We have to state the exact rate of the tax to be assessed. So this is part of that. Is it 1%? Is it 2%? Is it 14% like San Antonio just passed? And then we have to state the exact purpose for which the revenue derived from the tax should be used. So again, we have to state what the money raised will be used for. An example would be the streets, sidewalks, police, fire, general fund services, and we need to be very specific. So here's some example cities that currently do local option. City of Monterey, they have 1% sales tax. I didn't cover their exemptions. They do have some exemptions. They use $1,000. So if you go to Home Depot and you spend $1,000 on a single item, it's exempt. Not $1,000 total, but $1,000 on a single item is exempt. If you happen to stay at a hotel in Monterey and your bill is over $1,000, which nowadays isn't hard to do, it's also exempt. The Sandpoint, they have a 14% occupancy tax, so that means they're only taking a tax on short-term rentals, so 30 days or less. So it's typically your VRBOs, Airbnbs, and hotel motels. And that was just passed in November. Cascade, this is the largest city in this example of cities. There's quite a few in the state of Idaho. I tried to pick some, some across the state. They have a 1% sales tax. They do, from what I read, it doesn't look like they have any exemptions. City of Salmon, 4% occupancy tax. I talked to somebody earlier today, George Drummond, who spends a lot of time down there when he fought fire, and he said he always had to pay that, he wondered about it. Riggins, 2% tax on occupancy and liquor by the drink, and 1% sales tax on all other sales. So, with that essentially concludes my presentation. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Summary, where do we go from here? So we've established the problem, we established the challenge that we're up against, we've given you some strategies on, some options for how we can move forward. We're at the community level at this point, we're asking for community input, tell us what you think, ask your pithy questions, and then next steps, your city stands ready to start moving forward with the solution that, I'm not saying we all have to agree on it, but we definitely want consensus or some kind of level of dialogue that gives us an indication of where we're going. So we talk about why is it important, we talk about timelines. Here's the thing, our 2023 budget is $450,000 short. We've made up some of that with the generosity of the county using their ARPA dollars to keep the pool open. So you probably saw that in the paper. They have committed to giving the city $80,000 to keep our pool open this year. So thankfully that's been allocated and earmarked. We have applied for a grant from this LTAC to help cover our cost of operation and maintenance for a street department for this year and next year at $100,000, so $50,000 each year. So we're hoping, we start nipping down, right? We're gonna hopefully get to a place where it's a little bit, we're less concerned about this year. And that challenge is on us no matter what. So now we're talking about the next fiscal year. So good to know that, in order for us to get to a vote in May, we have to have to the county clerk the ballot measure in order for it to be placed on the ballot. We have to have it there 60 days ahead of time. So we don't have a lot of time if we want to get to a May vote. The reason a May vote's important is because the next time we can vote is in November. November would be after this fiscal year, 2024 fiscal year is set and started. Our fiscal year runs October 1st through September 30th. So if we don't wanna have to cut service to balance budget for 2024, then we need a vote in May to tell us how we're gonna move forward. So here, I mean, this is a pretty simplified timeline, I recognize that. This educating the community is important, it doesn't just happen in April, it happens today and tomorrow. But in order for us to get to a ballot measure in March, if that's the direction, we need to move pretty quickly. Okay, now we're ready for discussion. So, floor is open. I'm gonna turn the meeting back over to the mayor, let him moderate some. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm here, I'm not an expert in everything. I've spent a lot of time studying this problem. Council's been well, educated on some of this, but I mainly want to hear from you guys. Right? What do you think? How do we solve this as a community? What answers do you have for us? What questions do you have for us? And with that, I say go.
My question is, you raised $500,000 in your example, but your shortfall is $450. What happens to the extra?
Oh, I love that question. So, good question. And this is part of that dialogue. If we are able to raise more money than through local option than we need, we can only use the local option in the area that we identify within the context of the ordinance or the ballot measure, right? So, but there is a clause within the Idaho code that says any money raised outside of what's needed can and should go to property tax relief. So any money that we don't need or can't use in those areas that we've allocated would go to help city property tax relief, and it would be shown likely as a rebate.
That's good.
I don't know exactly how it'll go, but something like that. Go ahead, Adrian.
I was looking at subscription and dues, and I'm purchase services. And I'm only on page 1, I haven't really had a chance to go through all 60 pages. Why are you fluctuating from year to year such high
I'd be
numbers?
happy to sit down with you and talk, because every purchase service, it happens to be our contracted services, so, and those wax and wane depending on whatever projects we have allocated in a particular department.
Okay.
So when we start getting into some of the nuanced issues of each line item on there, it'd be better for me to sit down with you and talk one-on-one, unless there's a collective question across the board. It just, we could spend a lot of time getting into some of those line items, but I would be happy to make this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mayor?
Well, Lisa, are we talking tonight, basically this discussion tonight is what we're going to do after this fiscal year, right? What
Yeah,
you're
this is
doing-
fiscal year 24.
Yeah, so what you're doing to alleviate that shortfall,
This year.
you guys have got that
We
handled?
have a path forward that we're working on, and
Okay.
we're pretty confident we'll get there this year. We're not so confident about next year.
Okay.
And partly that's just because, again, grants are limited, the opportunities are limited. I mean, the county has been gracious this year, but they're not gonna have necessarily ARPA funds going.
I just wanted to make sure.
Lisa's been gracious enough to answer everybody's questions. And I think we should just leave it with her, don't you guys? Lisa, thank you, and for everybody out there, she put a lot of time and effort into this. I think it was very comprehensive. I think it kind of detailed everything that I think everybody wants to know. But like her, I would encourage questions. We've come up with what we feel is solutions, and she presented those 3 solutions. But what we don't know is there somebody out there that has a different idea? Is there something we're missing? I think is really what we're trying to say. I mean, and not just the people here, but the people you know. I mean, if there's a way to solve this without a local option tax, without a property tax, without cuts, that's what we want to hear. Obviously the questions, I mean, if you've got questions for sure, but, we're looking for solutions too.
Can I give a testimony?
Yes.
Okay, so I moved from Branson, Missouri 6 years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with Branson, Missouri. It's a little Vegas, right? And it was really interesting living in that town. They had such a high budget due to tourism. The schools were looking wonderful. They had full auditoriums and college-looking football fields. The swimming pool was elaborate. You can really see the tax dollars are really coming to it. And so I think the resort tax, or whatever you want to call it, is a good idea.
All right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ms. Adrian, for your comment.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
for those of you, I've been on the city council or a mayor for 28 years. And in looking over all of the issues that Lisa explained, she did an excellent job. So thank you very much for that. It's easy to speak in absolutes and again, when you look at all the options that you have available for the health and welfare of the community, those cuts are not an appropriate measure. We need those services, the community needs those services for the health and welfare of the community. Secondarily, the most fair tax involved is to tax as broad as possible, so that not any individual core is having to bear the burden unfairly. And where we have community, people from outside the community coming in and utilizing the facilities of the city and not paying anything towards those services, this helps offset that as well. So again, in my estimate, the local option sales tax is the absolute optimum opportunity for you. There's no tax that's fair, but it's about as fair as you can get, and also it's one that's gonna solve the solution, at least for that period of time that you can utilize it.
Thank you.
So for what it's worth, I need to leave now because there's television programs I wanna watch.
Thank you for coming, thank you for your comments, thank you for your wisdom.
I will say this, you know, when you start talking about the local option tax, every year when you file your taxes and you pay your money to the federal government, you have no idea where it's going. And the one thing you know with the sales tax is you know what it's being used for. I think that's the good thing about it.
Good point. Well, if I might add, the sales tax revenue that we get back from the state on 6% sales tax that's collected is less than $300,000. So it's pretty minuscule. If we can raise approximately $500,000 a year on 1% that stays here in the community and doesn't have to go to the state and then be funneled back at a highly discounted amount. I mean, that 1% gets us more money than all the money that we get from the state for sales tax.
Do we know, out of curiosity, what the state generates in sales tax revenue?
So, not offhand.
Okay, I just, sorry to put you on the spot.
Yes,
Sorry,
sir.
Mr. Clark, have a question.
Compared to the total budget, what is the percentage of this $450,000? What percentage does that represent of the total budget?
Good question, go ahead.
About 25.
Yeah, so our general fund budget is a little over $2 million, 2.2 maybe, so this would represent.
Okay, so it's significant.
Too much.
Yeah.
Kevin, Jim, question?
Yeah, Ponderay said raises about $3 million or something like that. Did those residents see a reduction in their property taxes?
I don't believe so. So Ponderay is doing something completely different with their funds. So Ponderay they do have police. They don't do their streets. They have a highway district that does that. They don't have fire. What they're using it for is they've got two projects. One is access to the lake. They're planning to do a railroad underpass on the whole part of town that would access the Ponderay Bay Trail and the lake. So they're accumulating funds to do that project. And then they have another project called the Field of Dreams. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a sports complex that would be north of Kootenai Cutoff Road. So they're just saving that money.
So with our monies, if we collect it through this community tax thing, is that something that, you know, in the future, we could have a covered pool and we would utilize those monies instead of giving a tax break on our existing property? Could we utilize those monies for other things that might benefit the community?
I think it all depends on how we structure the tax, in that, if you remember, when I went back to, so it happens in, we have to state the purpose or purposes for which the revenue derived from the tax shall be used.
Does that
It
have
has
to be
an
done
ordinance.
yearly?
No, it's an ordinance, it's for the life and the term that we set.
But, okay, for the life of the term that we set, but forever can't be the term. So you could say, oh, for the next 3 years, this is what we're using it for. After that, it can be changed.
It can only be changed by a vote.
If you can pass it again.
In other words, whatever we set this up for, there's going to be a term attached to that as well. And I think that, Pond rated 5 years?
5 years.
We talked about a
5.
longer period,
Simple solution.
possibly 10 years.
Can it be then that any excess saved or earned over and above what's needed be saved for other projects?
Only that which was defeated.
I can bring up a good point, and we need to be very specific about how we.
And admittedly, we have not done that work yet, because we don't know, we didn't quite know, I mean, we had a feeling in some of our discussions that we'd had with locals, and many of you that met with me individually, kinda gave me a sense for, where we might land on this, but we haven't done the work until we got to this level of discussion with the
I have
community.
a question.
Sorry, Craig.
If I understand it correctly, regardless of how we shape this or say we can use the money, it still should be applied to the general fund. Is that correct?
That's something you get to decide, but I think that's the intent.
Well, you
purpose.
talk about, a refund back on taxes, which is not necessarily the case, but improvements, like you talked about the pool or something like that, would have to be a general fund improvement.
Yeah, so the point of the property tax relief, it's an opportunity within the statute that we don't have to put into the ordinance. It's already available to us. That's the way I read it, unless I have it wrong. So in the event that we have met our obligations on the areas that we designed the tax to serve, and there's more, then we can take any overages and apply to property tax relief. We don't have to put that in the ordinance, but it wouldn't hurt to do it.
So, and you could do, if there was extra money, you could do a combination, it wouldn't have to be just one. Yeah.
It just has to be
Stated.
stated as the purpose or purposes.
Yeah.
Like, we can't say, well, today we're gonna, give Jimmy a big raise.
Yeah.
If it isn't written in there,
It can't
sorry,
be done.
Jimmy.
Seems like people like pay raises too, so if it's a 450 grand today and it's $500,000 tomorrow.
Admittedly, that's an area that I would love to see flexibility, if local option was the path forward, would be that we could adequately fund some of our departments that have challenges meeting livable wage
Sure.
requirements. And I think we would probably go broader in our assessment of where that purpose would be to give us that opportunity.
I think that something that we may have missed when we're looking at the various solutions that we did, when we looked at the cutting services section, the services that we looked at cutting aren't just about quality of life. Some of the services that we looked at are about life itself. When we looked at possibilities of cutting, the city pool, for our children in our community and in our county and our city, learning how to swim is essential.
My
in
kids
this
learn to swim
community. And our city police force, with the amount of benefit that they provide in our community, I believe that some of these, and our fire department, I don't believe that cutting services is much of an option for us at all. And I'll just come right out and say that I don't believe we should cut any of it. I don't believe we should cut our current services.
If I may, I'd like to speak to that because in a sense, that's what many families, most families are exactly dealing with food costs up 80%, fuel, taxes went up, my property taxes went up, here we're talking about. Families have had to make serious cuts of things that could be in that same category, almost life and death stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, safety, all kinds of things, so, I think to not cut to not tighten our belt as a city when everyone else is doing it may breed some ill will there, so. I don't know, does 5% option, because, you know, obviously it's not coincidental to me that the numbers are almost exactly the same. The local option tax would resolve the problem. But I have to say, when I realized I was paying another percent if I bought something in Ponderay, it really bothered me. I thought, I'll go buy my chicken feed at Woods instead of, you know, the co-op. And so now we're talking about doing it in our town. It's like, ah, it does seem to solve the problem, but couldn't we tighten our belt a little bit and maybe do a 0.5% option tax? And, you know, I don't know. This is a difficult issue, obviously, because I didn't realize it was actually 25%. That's a big deal. 25% suddenly isn't there.
Yep.
Where's it gonna come from? So, maybe a little bit of undesirable, sounds like a lawyer thing, you know, if everybody's unhappy equally, then it's a good deal.
Well, it's not only the people in the city, so it's county,
Yeah.
it's state, it's
Yeah.
nationwide, anybody that comes through here and spends money
Yeah.
is subject to it.
One thing we haven't talked about is that you have to have a term on this 1%, and say that term is five years. At the end of 5 years, in order to extend it, you have to have another vote. And, if that vote says no, then what?
Well,
Cross that bridge.
yeah, if that's a question, the government usually doesn't cut. That should be voted in.
What I'm saying is, if you do it for 5 years with a 1%, local option tax, at the end of 5 years, it's over with, and you have to have another vote to continue it for another 5 or whatever.
So we
And I'm
do,
saying if that vote fails, and then where are we coming up with that money?
we'd be right where we are now.
And I think he hints at a good point, Adrian, just if you don't mind jumping in on this, is that when you start using a tax to support operation expenses, it's really hard to constrict that back to. So if we were able to give ourselves a longer term, over the course of that term, we might be looking at other sources of revenue like infill, maybe new businesses coming into town, and we can sort of wean ourselves off more versus this sort of cliff that we're on right now. So, sorry, Mr. Mayor, Adrian.
Yeah, you don't know what new businesses are gonna come in and be within the city limits. So it could lower it.
And we've seen quite a few stressors, in the growth in the county, on our services of late. I mean, because, we've seen growth in the county, and we haven't seen quite as much growth within the city, but we have seen a lot of use. And, you know, we could probably speak to that, at just about any of our departments. You know, the city is actually paying quite a lot more than we used to do a lot of other things. So if we take a look at the stressors, because county residents are using city services quite a lot. So it would be awesome to have that cost spread out to some degree as well.
So I also, is it my turn?
Go ahead.
So I think about tax brackets and how it makes it fair for, you know, different income brackets and so forth. I think it is fair for someone that makes $200,000 a year, who's gonna be more out buying sushi at Super One, you know, or going out to eat every Friday night, than someone that's barely affording it. So, to put a flat tax on someone's property, that can be a pretty bad hardship on them. But to be able to spread it out to those who are able to go out and freely spend their money a little bit better, or people that come into town and utilize your services, like myself, you know, if I want to take my kids to the swimming pool, or let's say I'm going to go to the post office and check my mail, I'm ruining your streets, right? So I'm putting wear and tear on your streets. So I think it's great. I think the sales tax is a good way to go.
There was, back here, right.
So, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one in the room, but I actually pay, my taxes went down this year, so thank you to whoever did that, and I hope that wasn't a typo.
Let me get your name. We'll take
Some
it.
people's taxes actually went down this year. It was only $30, it wasn't much, but thank you, because now I can afford to buy eggs. But,
Your city tax or
I'm just-
overall? Your city tax or
my
overall?
property tax.
Okay, the total
Of
bill.
the city,
Well, on the city or on the count, or the total bill?
No, from when I paid last year to this year went down $30.
Well, that could have been because of the lack of the school bond
Oh, man.
having passed.
Anyway,
But anyway,
if time is an essence, I just know from many conversations around here, when there's any, issue that comes on and gonna hit people's property tax, I think it's gonna be way easier to pass the 1% tax than it is gonna be to try and get a vote to raise property taxes. So, that's my vote.
That's
To go with the 1%, because I work in a public place where people are spending money. And I would be happy to take 1% extra from all those people coming from out of town to buy books.
Oh, hell yeah.
Thanks, Kevin.
Is that what you want to say? With how you
No,
vote?
I wanted to add too, you know, you brought up a good point about the people that go out to eat. You know, people that go out to eat, they have enough money to go out to eat, and they have enough money to pay a tip. And they're gonna pay a 1% tax. Is it something that can be applied to entertainment type services only perhaps?
You'd have
Cause your
to
fixed
exempt.
income elderly people, an extra couple of bucks for every bag of groceries affects them.
Yeah.
Where.
And that's something I feel like with our representatives here from the state, that it would be great to see the grocery tax really take a little bit more of the grocery tax relief, I guess, bill, to take a little bit more precedence in this legislative session.
Gosh,
Because
those
that's-
things are inflated.
That's something that I think every year comes up and they go back and forth, because it'd be really nice to see the state deal with that and give that grocery tax, what they call it, the grocery tax relief, back to the folks who need it. And that way this $1 or $2 a year, or sorry, not a year, but a time, if you're spending $100, let's say, is really nominal, because they're getting that back at the end of the year in the form of the state refunding that. So that's, I say that, but looking at Jake, knowing that, you know, he can hear the governor on that, so.
Does that occupancy tax just apply to like hotels and,
So, yeah.
like
so
you
the-
said, the vacation by hour or
30
whatever?
days or less.
So the state statutes I copied here, you can look at them, there's specifically, I'm sort of getting into the nuances of this tonight because I didn't know how the conversation was gonna go. I decided to print this for folks to take, but there are specific requirements in it that state how the tax can be used, and specifically, and I have some like frequently asked questions, FAQs that I can give out to folks. I should have printed them tonight, but that say that it needs to be summary here. Oh yeah, here we go. Resort, they call it resort safe. Voting on the question may approve. An occupancy tax upon hotel, motel, and other sleeping accommodation. This is Title 50-1046. An occupancy tax upon hotel, motel, or other sleeping accommodations rented less than for a period of 30 days or less, so that's standpoints. That's their occupancy. B is a tax upon liquor by the drink, wine and beer sold at retail for consumption on the licensed premise, so that's gonna be your bar tax. And then it says a sales tax upon all or part of sales subject to taxation. So that's where it gets, where you can put those directions of where you would wanna put those funds. Or one of the things when I worked with David on our estimations, and Mr. Clark was right, and you know, obviously we're gonna try to be frugal in our estimations. We wanna make sure that we're not underestimating or overestimating something and then coming in short. So we tried to be pretty careful about how we came up with our estimations. We weren't, you know, it's really hard to get good data, essentially. So with that in mind, when you start paring it down, it definitely cuts the amount of money that we'll receive down too. So if we're not looking at grocery sales, we will see that's the majority of our sales inside city limits.
Groceries.
Does anybody want a copy of the?
Do they eat?
I would just say that, you know, the local option tax, personally, Lisa and I talked, and I think that's a great way to go. And as far as any funds being in a slush category, I think you would have, you would establish a better trust between the government, the city council and the city manager, whatever, and the local property tax payer, if you would include in that, that if there are, extra funds, at least a portion of that to go back to the property tax relief idea. I think people would appreciate that.
Well, I think, isn't the police department still operating 20 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Yes.
Cause then that's one of those things where I don't think the community realizes how much we cut to begin with. So like, I do think like a rebate would be really great, but what if we need to hire another officer?
Well,
Cause the
I'm not-
county is taking over that, the sheriff's department, it's
I know.
now overextended,
I know,
so.
but I'm not saying
Yeah, I know.
all the extra money, but just a portion of it, or at least making it clear that a portion of it, say 10% of it, or 20% of it, or whatever, that, I think that would help people. I think you'd get more support, and complete, I hate the word transparency anymore, it's just overlooked, but whatever word you're gonna use, you know, but to be completely honest with what you're doing with that money, it is, yeah.
So, not to get off subject, but I would like to clarify what Emily just said. Are we still at 20 hour
We're
or,
still 20 hours
20
a
hours,
day,
yeah.
7 days
Okay.
a week, which means the sheriff's department's
but
taking over.
didn't you hire Garrett?
Oh, no, he's a school resource officer, so he's doing that during the school
Oh,
He's
year.
not,
okay.
yeah, he's not actually. Our Brandon Johnson is a school resource officer. We are running a 20-hour day. County's picking up 4 hours during that day, depending on when we have, essentially, when, we were limited.
I just thought that a few weeks later, after you announced that, you hired, Jeremy.
Oh, Garrett.
Yeah, maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Well, no, so they're still hired, but that's not taking over the
It
shift.
didn't increase the number.
No.
I mean, I'd have to go back and look at it, but it
Yeah.
isn't like we added a police officer. I think we might have replaced one.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we're down an officer right now.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
done.
So now the county's covering that, so it's one of those, if we keep, is there fat? Maybe, but if we're cutting too much, then the county has to cover other things, and now they're getting the deficit, but,
You're not.
you know, well, maybe not, but it's also like they've got their other departments.
It's also worth looking at, the city police response to it. There are many more arrests than the county, officers, perform. So eventually, if the city police is, you know, the staffing level is decreased, the cost of the county will go up because their officers will have to be doing that. Because a lot of the crime is in the city. It is. So if you look at the number of arrests that the city officer makes, it's more than the county. By multiple.
Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, you guys are requesting another, or the school's requesting another resource officer, and they're asking you guys to fund partially.
They're gonna, that one will be out of the city limits though.
Yeah, but I
And
think
that's-
the city
That's
is,
between the county and city.
oh, that one is, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
No, but that coverage from the sheriff's office, is that covered under the reciprocity agreement, or is the city reimbursing?
No, it's reciprocity.
Just to address the idea of the city tightening their belts, I think, Mr. Clark, if you speak to any of our department heads in the past few years, they could speak to the idea of just how much they have tightened their belts in the last few years. And just how challenging that budget has been. They have worked very well with us, in order to set their budgets and really prioritize what is needed, so that we could come together and that they could work with the council to do so. It's something that we really appreciated. So that we could collaborate, rather than the council just making these decisions and passing them down, but that's something that we've been really grateful, because we have very much tightened the belts within our departments.
Rich?
This is Caleb mostly to take back, and this is something I came in front of the city council about a year and a half ago or so. And that's on the vacant businesses that are around here that are left vacant. And as I understood, the city pretty much said that they can't do anything about it, it's up to the state. The state's put those rules up. You know, we got a mill out there that should be bringing in, I mean, I don't know how much taxation we got off our mill out here. That when it was alive, but it was a lot of money, I'm sure. Then we got Safeway right across the road here that has, two buildings that have been sitting there, the old China Kitchen and Jim's vacuum place that's been sitting, probably getting, I don't know what taxes they pay, minimum, I'm sure. And then we have the Safeway building downtown, and there's more out there that are just, the woman downtown that bought the 3 or 4 businesses downtown, 3 of those are sitting there doing nothing. They're getting minimum taxes, I'm sure, I don't know, somebody else can tell me that, but the state should allow a city to do something about the businesses that are sitting, and they're just, you know, I talked to a guy that worked, I says, why would the mill do that, besides can't they let something in there? And a guy said to me, I know why they're not, because they need all their employees they got, and they don't want another big business going in there, they're afraid they're gonna lose their employees. But we got the businesses here that would pay for all our services that we need, except for the state doesn't allow us to tax them like they should be taxed. They're holding back a lot of money that we should have in our city, and I'm peed off about it, and I have been for the last 2 years. I took videos of everything. The only thing my son did was my son got hold of Albertsons because he knew the woman that takes care of the estate of them, and that's the only reason they got cleaned up in the first place over there last year. And they finally mowed it. This year they did a little tiny bit. But you know, they're dangerous to have around because they're empty and nobody pays attention to them. You don't know if there's people living in them, do anything. Kids could get raped back here, for Christ's sakes. The thing is, the state is the one that needs to give our cities a little more power to do with businesses that we have here already. And that we're wasting. We wouldn't even have to be here doing this if we had even half of those businesses paying the taxes, that properties.
I think what you're hinting at too is not just whether or not they're paying property tax, because we know that they're paying property
Yes.
tax, it's whether or not, because they have a lack of business in there, that it's a blight on our community as well as our economics, that we should have tools in our toolkit to help incentivize bringing businesses into those facilities.
Yes.
And that's an area that admittedly the city has very little, our hands are tied based on our private property rights state. And I don't necessarily disagree sometimes with that local government should have a stronger hand at that. I do believe small government, local government, that's answers to the people is the answer. However, I do feel that there might be opportunities for disincentifying vacant buildings. I mean, we've gone through urban renewal and to work on some of our blight, but even that has its hands tied.
That's Dave's department, we'll leave it to him.
But it's still an issue. He doesn't have the same tools that we don't have.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Kevin, I have to say, I love your enthusiasm for your hand.
Why, thank you, there's
Yeah.
nothing more contagious than it.
I love it.
Except the lack of it. So, yeah, I got a lot of it. Anyways,
That sounds like a Yogi Berra.
so with, your occupancy tax, versus the local options tax, that's gonna affect people that don't live here. I love to affect those people the most. If I could impact somebody's pocketbook, I'd wanna impact those people that are just passing through. You know, the people that live here, again, back to those elderly people that are on fixed incomes, Social Security, 8% increase, ooh, it's not keeping up, right? And there are people in this community that, again, going to that grocery store, it may be your biggest revenue source in the city. However, that every couple of bucks for a bag of groceries is costly.
Yeah.
And so if you can add to this, and there'll be a 5% or whatever figure y'all come up with on occupancy tax, restaurants. Again, if you can afford to go out to eat, if you can afford to go down to the local bar and have a drink, you can afford to pay a little more.
I like it. Yeah, no, I like what you're saying.
So, if the city were to do the 1%, it would apply to lodging, just as
Sure.
part of the normal sales tax?
Let's squeeze a couple more out of it.
Well, the city tried that in 2008, there was a vote, and for just an occupancy tax of 5%, and it failed miserably, but, and I think the reason is because it really only affected 3 businesses. We only have 3 hotels that would have been.
So it's not a lot.
Because it's just the Northside Bed and Breakfast, the Carriage House, and
Not the Kootenai River?
No.
Is that tribal lands of
Yes.
some sort? I see. Huh.
So the question that, oops, sorry, the question that came up on the screen here that I think it dovetails nicely with the question, the statement that you made, Mr. Kevin, is, the question is, I think the sales tax increase is a great idea, everyone would be contributing, is the dollar amount only using a number from local residents contributing, or does it factor in tourists? If so, do we have any approximate dollars that would be? And to answer the question, I don't think that the state does a good job of telling us where the money's coming from, so all we have is amount of sales generated within the county. So it's an estimation at that point. How much of that comes from outside tourist dollars or transient dollars coming through town, we don't know. But here's something I think is important to understand, and it's something I find value around the conversation, and that is that when, no matter where you live, if you're transient, traveling through town, a visitor staying, or a county resident or a city resident coming in to rely on the services, the city has to be prepared and have sort of on demand these services available to help if you need it. So if you need to call the police because you're experiencing an issue at a local business or somewhere in town, we need to make sure we have police ready and queued up, ready to go. And the folks that are coming in and spending money in town are essentially paying for that demand with that 1% sales tax. Same with if they need, fire department or they literally need to get through town and we need to have street maintenance. And so by them paying that percentage, when they're coming through town, it does, provide for that demand to be ready for them. And I think that's an equitable thing to think about as we navigate this process. And, I don't want to use equality or equitability. I don't want to overuse that because I think that's a term also we tend to see it and hear a lot in the media these days. But when we try to look at a fairness factor, it does stretch that out. So if a county resident comes in and they're spending, let's just say on average $10,000 a year in taxable services, they are in town for those times, they now have on demand those services ready for them. They're paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not falling on the backs of the residents to do so. Same with the tourists and same with the city residents. So I think it's just worth thinking about it in that context, and I think it does help kind of show the equitability standpoint more.
And Canadians, if we ever get the borders open.
Yeah. I'm working on it.
But you're talking about cutting services, and, I can speak directly about the police department. I mean, they just get by. And if you look historically, for the past 50 years, we've got the same amount of officers that we had 50 years ago, other than a school resource officer. And the crime has gone up exponentially, the population has gone up, and we still do with basically 6 officers and that school resource.
I knew it wouldn't be a popular thing to say, but I thought somebody had to.
No, I think it's a consideration that needs to be taken.
What do you consider if this doesn't pass? Then we are back to those options, cutting services. When you cut $500,000 of services, figure out where that's coming from.
Lisa, did you open this up for public comment?
The mayor's the one who's managing at this point.
Oh, yeah, that's gonna fly.
You talked about $10,000 and 1% of that being $100, but the greatest expense for most people is the grocery store, and that is going to affect locals. If a local option of 1%, could the city exempt, even though the state is willing to, could the city exempt groceries?
If you did exempt groceries,
Yeah.
groceries are the bulk of the money.
Okay.
So if you didn't do groceries, they wouldn't have enough money to. It would-
And 1% of $200 a week is $2.
Yes, sir. That's the neat thing about it, is it just hits you a little at a time. It's not like you spend $10,000 a year on groceries and at the end of the year, you gotta cough up a chunk of money right now.
Nickel
The
and
state would
dime
come
to
in
death.
and
Nickel and dime your way through.
grocery tax.
We were trying to.
Yeah.
From that in the record.
Any other questions back here?
He's better go to every
Rob,
day
sorry.
and grab a sandwich.
Yeah, I was gonna say, from a business standpoint, I would caution that your 1% that it will affect purchases done in Bonners Ferry. You know, being as close to the Montana border as we are, we already have a large number of folks that will drive the distance for 5%. Now, Ponderay has that tax, and we even see a few people that will float back and forth because of the 1%. I'm not saying that it's a deal breaker, but I think if you went over 1%, you would notice, even in your groceries, people would already traveling the same point, you're gonna have more people.
We're still at 15% on tires.
Yes.
I went to Montana to go get my couches this year, and I was quite shocked. The same exact couch here was the 6% higher there. So
Hey,
we
bull.
get tricked into believing we're saving taxes by going over there, but with the couches, it wasn't the case.
Our cigarettes are
They-
cheaper is
they
what I've been
realize
told.
what's going
And
on.
when you have, Grocery Outlet has that wine sale for their 25% off.
Yeah.
Whoever their guy is that's selling wine, their dirt will convince you to buy anything, but people are flocking from Montana to buy these cases of El Gringo and God knows what wine. And they're just filling it up and they'll just go twice a year for the sales. So I'm like, 1% on that. They're like, psh, this wine goes for $19.95 anywhere else, I'm getting it for $4.50. Put 3% on there at that point is what they're thinking. Don't do that though, but things like that is actually driving.
I think
me
gas is
crazy.
the only thing really cheaper over there.
You
Gas.
gotta get over
So,
there.
you
Yeah.
know, you sell tires, and they can get pretty expensive, you can spend $1,500 on a set of tires.
Oh, easy.
So, that probably would, with the 6% sales tax, would probably make it well worth driving to Libby to get those same tires.
Absolutely.
From
And I
your
do
store
everything here.
in Libby,
Absolutely.
they'd save money.
Library.
And, you know, I think
Unless we
it's-
capped it, let's say.
I think it's
Everything's here.
And, you know, like
I like
Rich's in the
this
same boat, right, is you've got $5 merchandise, and so when people are looking at groceries, you're talking $1 or $2, that's no big deal. When you're talking about bigger purchases, obviously that's gonna affect what you.
Even the meat lockers, butchering, I mean,
But
that's
$1,000 with the gas prices, who's gonna drive over there for a saving of $10?
That's,
And just
that's
to
what
be
we
clear-
tried to standpoint. But we talked about the limit,
going there.
if you, and we haven't really come
It's not a
to,
deal breaker.
If we got a record here, just make sure we pick up.
yeah, we talked about a limit on this of $1,000. So if you buy a large item for $10,000, you're not gonna pay sales tax on all that. You're not gonna pay that extra 1%. And with the discussion we've had is, and it's gone back and forth, if it's over 1,000, you don't pay any tax. And I think the discussion really is that you pay the extra 1% on the first $1,000, but you don't pay on the rest of it.
Why are you
I think
capping?
it could go either way.
It could.
Why are you capping?
Because no one would buy a car in this town.
Okay.
Right.
I understand now.
There's
There's a point when people start saying it's worth my gas.
It's
Yeah.
$1,000, so I think that larger item, becomes negligible.
Okay.
And,
Over and above 1,000.
Yeah.
and Dick, let me make sure that it's taxable only on items, not on services, is that correct?
And I was gonna clarify that with Shelley. is
That's
it
what we were
doesn't-
just talking,
Yeah, it
yeah.
does not include services, so the
Right.
butcher shop is, you would maybe pay it on if there was a taxable good, but not a taxable service.
And the other thing is if it's currently exempt, like say for the production exemption for logging and farming.
It'd be exempt.
Still exempt.
Yeah, exactly, it's following the sales tax as well.
So in order to be respectful of your time, it's 10 minutes to 7. I'd like to kind of wrap up by 7, so you can get home and watch your shows, because I don't know, I wanna know what he's watching. Who wants to know that?
The other.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll jump in.
I don't mind at all.
He just had it.
You know, the next steps, if I'm hearing correctly, kind of the resounding kind of option would be to look at both local option and maybe cutting services, which is definitely something, or tightening our belt, we'll call it. So we're not necessarily cutting services, but we're looking at where we can be more efficient. And those are things, as a city government, there are times when you have to make significant investments in order to become more efficient. And we always try to balance those with cutting, potentially tightening our belt. So I hear what you're saying, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I understand, and I wanna know, I think council also hears that. I think it's, and I
didn't hear cutting services.
Yeah.
but I mean,
Tightening
tightening the belt.
Tightening the belt.
So Loretta, I know you and I have
Not
talked
cutting.
about that, and I want you to know that we hear you, that, and I definitely have taken to heart those ways that we can become efficient, more productive, and still look at tightening. So those are always things that we're grappling with at the management level of the city. But if we're looking at local option, the next steps for us is to really maybe create a strategic planning group to look at those barriers in which we would construct the ordinance for. So Mr. Mayor, if you'd be so inclined as to, and the council to consider that, we can put it on the next agenda.
Should.
And we need to keep track, March is right around the corner.
Yes, there's a lot of work on
Gotta
it.
move.
You need to educate your voters.
And so here's my pitch, because it's always about the
Sure.
pitch, right? The elevator pitch is,
That's what I'm gonna do here.
you guys are now educated. I hope we've done a pretty thorough job of getting you up to speed on the challenge and the solutions, and we kind of now have more of a lane that we're working in. We need help. We're only a small community of people serving our residents in our community, so what can we lean on the community to help us? And I know in some of my conversations individually with everybody, you've heard me ask that same question. Who can you
vote? Is it a countywide vote?
No,
City.
City.
City residents.
But what I don't wanna have-
You don't live, but you have a business, you don't get a
You don't
vote.
vote, but if you're not supportive of it, it makes it, what we wanna know is what are the challenges, and we can be very transparent with our voters. What we don't wanna be is responding to things in a reactionary place. So hence why we're having these conversations, these meetings individually. And Mr. Rich, we came and spoke with you. We understand some of the challenges you're faced. I've met with some other individuals. If you feel like you wanna meet with me and talk through this, I have an open door policy. You just have to kind of let me know ahead of time so I make sure I'm there and available. But I would really like to get into the framework of what this local option could look like with all the discussion that was talked tonight about, and try to present back to council and the community what that could look
I
like.
have a question. Would the people here like to have another one of these meetings later on?
I think we pretty much covered everything.
Comfortable with
Yeah.
the meeting we have?
I'd like to know what you guys come up with for, as far as what we're gonna potentially vote on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Mayor, what I'd recommend is, we all, people here know what's going on, but there's gonna be other people who aren't quite aware of this problem yet. So, yeah, I'd say leave the door open for having another meeting with other people.
So,
Emily
get out
gets
to the
the
public.
get the word out.
And actually, everybody in here right now has a responsibility to, pass the word.
Yes.
Let your friends and neighbors know what's going on, your family members.
Send them to me if you need them.
I'm gonna put this on my channel, and I'm gonna actually take your PowerPoint and plug it in there so people can actually
Make
see
sure
it a
you
little
take the
closer.
one with the correction in it though.
Well, I can
I
mark
will
it.
send that to you. If you give me
Oh,
your
yeah,
email
that'd be
address,
great.
I'll make sure you
Yeah.
have it. I'm
So
back.
I'll present this. I think it's for me, I actually think this was well presented. And, I think obviously the people in the room were heard. And, I think it's an excellent idea.
So I will do this. I will put the PowerPoint presentation on the website under the council agenda
Okay.
in minutes section, so you guys can pull it off within
Yeah.
minutes.
And Lisa, this meeting was not on the schedule for on your website.
Yeah, I put it on there.
It popped up like yesterday.
It was on, I put it on there on Friday.
I
So
don't, did you see it? Okay.
Okay.
So that's important, and I think too, maybe, just lots of advertisement.
Yeah.
Maybe do an insert or something, I don't know how hard that is to do with the bills. I know how much.
We talked
extra
about
work
that.
would
I
be,
think part
but-
of the challenge is that we wanted to get a more constructive group. When we get too large, it becomes really hard to be in a place of
Yeah, I was thinking
really
just,
exacting out of people what their thoughts are.
I was
So-
just thinking the local voters, but I know
Yes.
that would be kind of a hard thing to do, so just
But I
lots of
wanna encourage the
advertising.
business owners, to take the time to spend, if you have questions or maybe some furthering thoughts, if you have some, considerations that maybe, you wanted to continue to talk about, or you've had after we get done here today, to call me. I wish I would've brought cards, but apparently we haven't ordered new cards in a long time, so I need to get some of those ordered. But you can find my information on the website, so.
That's too much. Cut the budget for that.
Tighten the belts.
I'd just like to say for the record that I do support the local option tax. I mean, it's far above the other options you have out there. But if it comes to other things, you may discuss this when I have to read. But, there are other options out there, and I hope it doesn't come to some of those. But, either way, this, the only drawback of this is aside from the term that he set, once this city hits a population of 10,000, it can no longer apply local option tax.
We'll all be dead before.
Yeah,
I was gonna say.
yeah, it's
So,
kinda
Yeah,
we'll
it's
get that.
pretty serious and actually.
That's right.
Thanks, guys, thank you, everybody.
Let the record reflect.
Yeah, you're